This episode is proudly supported by Powerhouse Parramatta.
Powerhouse Parramatta will open in 2025. The new museum will be the largest in New South Wales and is determined to offer the very best in hospitality. Perhaps your business can be part of defining a food and beverage offering which is expected to cater to 2 million visitors a year. This incredible opportunity for operators includes retail food and beverage, in-house residential catering, events and other hospitality ventures, encapsulating the diversity of cuisines and cultures that make Western Sydney so exciting. Interested to learn more? Powerhouse invites food and beverage operators to a briefing on Tuesday, 8th of August. For more information and to register for this exclusive briefing, go to powerhouse.com.au.
And I was on the path on the Sunday night and the phone rang at about 8 o'clock. I picked up the phone. I goes, "Yep, Boronia Kitchen, Simon." "Yep, hi mate. My name's Matt Moran, and I was just wondering if you've got time for a bit of a chat." I goes, "Mate, I'm in the middle of service. Like, can you call me back tomorrow?" And I put the phone down. And Andy's looking at me. He goes, "Who was that?" And I go, "Some guy called Matt Moran." And I looked at him, I goes, "I should have taken that phone call, shouldn't I?" And he goes, "Yeah, probably."
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. With the evolution of our culinary landscape has been a push to raise the bar in the suburbs, not just hubs of the community, but dining destinations in their own right, delivering the sort of food one historically might head to the CBD for. What are the challenges of creating a great suburban restaurant? Simon Sandall is the chef and owner of Boronia Kitchen in Boronia Park, Sydney. Simon, how are you?
I'm good. How are you, Anthony?
I'm good. It's good to have you on the show. You come from the world of one of Australia's best restaurants with Aria and multiple hats and so many awards, and you took off to the suburbs. What's it been like creating a restaurant in the suburbs?
Oh, look, it's been, mate, there's no question. It's, it's been exciting for one. But it's, obviously with the last few years that everyone's gone through, it's had its challenges. But, at the same time, through them challenges, it's sort of, helped push the restaurant to a whole new dimension at the same time. So if that makes sense, but it's, obviously we opened up Boronia in 2018, with a year of trading, and then we hit this pandemic, which, like everybody else in the Sydney and the world, it scared the living bejeebies out of us all, you know what I mean? So it was, you think, I sort of built a business with so many different arms to it. You just think to yourself, I've always had this, this mentality of trying to create different revenue streams so that, if something falls off, that you can pick it up on the other side, to keep you going, because, the restaurant game can be quite fickle, and then you get a pandemic thrown into the scenario, and, you just think your whole world's falling down on you. So it was, it's had its challenges, but then at the flip side is, through the pandemic and when we were able to open back up, because, there was all this working from home and stuff, that it sort of pushed people to, check out what's around them a little bit more, which sort of gave us that so much more exposure. And it's just, it has helped grow the business, but at the same time, through that growth, you've obviously had a lot of downtime with not trading, so there's been a pile of debt that you've had to sort of incur and sort of try and navigate your way through to, to get that paid off, and and that's been challenging. But I'm having said all that, I'm very, very grateful for where we're at, and Boronia in itself is just such a beautiful space and such a beautiful business and restaurant, and it's I'm grateful. I'm grateful to be here, to be honest with you.
I want to explore what you've created there, but you're an important cog in the Aria wheel for so long. Take us back to that time when you made the decision to to venture and open a restaurant in the suburbs?
Well, I mean, I arrived. I'm originally from the UK, Anthony, as you probably gathered. But I got here in 1995, and I prior to that, I was living in Africa for a year, and I came with this silly goatee beard and hair down to my, near to my bum, and I'd been traveling the world for a few years, and I got to Sydney, and so it was about time I got a job, and a friend of mine was working at the Sydney Opera House at the time, and he said, "Mate, come and work at the Opera House," and so I got into an introduction there. I'd actually applied for a couple of jobs and got turned down, believe it or not. I was quite surprised. One of them being the Park Hyatt. And my first job actually in Australia was the Orient Hotel down at the Rocks, flipping about 800 steaks a day, and it was a lot of fun. It was a bit of party and just enjoying life. And then, like I say, I got this opportunity at the Opera House, and I sort of took that, and the rest it just happened. I mean, I remember the first 3 weeks of being at the Sydney Opera House, and I was working with a guy called David Sampson, and he's one of my best mates to this day. And I sort of hit him up straight away and said, is there any chance of sponsorship and staying in the country? And he was like, "Look, mate, I've only known you for a couple of weeks, and let's just see what happens." And little did I know, behind the scenes, he was after about 6 months of being there, he was actually putting and speaking to the right people to get this residency thing happening. And look, and I'm forever grateful of what he did for me in them times. But the first 3 weeks at the Opera House, we had this, and it's still to this day the biggest sit down event at the Sydney Opera House, and it was 3,500 people on the forecourt for this Sunday American sort of institutional dinner, and I was his sous chef at the time, my sous chef at the time. His father, I think, passed away, and he had to go back to New Zealand, and Dave was sort of, overlooking and organising the bulk of it, but he came to me and said, "Can you look after the food side of things?" And mate, I'd never done anything like that. You know what I mean? And I just went, you know what? Let's have a crack. And, so I was sort of working very closely with Dave and organising kitchen plans, and, there was 4 lots of kitchens, and, I was this, young 23, 24-year-old. And I had all these agency staff come in, and they were like grown men, and they're looking at me because, man, I've always had this ability of looking 10 years younger than what I really am. And, I had 40, 45 of these agency staff prepping all this food. And they're like, "Who's this little whippersnipper, coordinating this, this food side of this massive event?" Which was interesting, to say the least. And I've actually still, I can remember we basically did this chicken and asparagus terrine, and I'm like thinking, how the hell am I doing all this? And I mean, whilst Dave was a great mentor and gave me a lot of guidance, there was a lot of thinking on your feet. You just had to get on and get it done. And I've still got the recipe somewhere at home, and I can remember getting like 120 kilos of chicken breasts that we had to turn into this chicken mousse, and we had, like 70 boxes of asparagus that we had to peel down and layer out through this train and steam them all in the combi ovens, and and basically orchestrate this event. And it was, and then on the day of the event, it was working with people like Yanni and Gay Bilson. And and we had 4 different kitchen teams, and it was a huge success. But for me, from a learning capacity, it was just like, this is just, I'm 3 weeks into a job at the Sydney Opera House. I always said, being back in the UK, and I knew I wanted to come to Australia from the age of 15, Anthony. And my brother came here for the bicentenary and travelled around in Australia, and like every other POM, I used to see and watch Prisoner Cell Block H and Aussie Rules when I got home late at night and just had these aspirations to come to Australia. So coming to Australia and landing a job within, 6 or 7 months at the most iconic building in the world, or one of, was, it was massive for me, and I just went, you know what, it doesn't matter what challenges are thrown at me, I'm just going to have a crack at it, you know what I mean? And, my background in the UK was fine dining. I worked in some, prestigious hotels, and so I got my base. I worked with some very talented chefs back in the UK. A guy called Michael Kitts, has been a big mentor and a massive part of my career to where it is now. If it wasn't for what he did for me as a person, it was, I probably wouldn't be here. I mean, but having said that, it was he's one of many people that sort of helped me through my career, and get me to where I am today. So,
well, take us back to the UK. What sort of role did food play in your family growing up?
Look, I was back in the days. The family never really had much. We, come from a sort of middle class sort of family, and we didn't really have a great deal of money. I've got 5 brothers and sisters, and but one thing that I do remember, my father was a phenomenal cook, and had this talent, and it didn't matter what was in the house. He just somehow would go to any cupboard, and and he never measured anything. He'd just throw stuff in a pot, and he might have especially around Christmas time, there was a lot of pigeon shooting and pheasants and partridge and all that sort of stuff. So we used to around that time, especially my father, I don't know where he got them from, but whoever was shooting them down, but he'd have them hung up in the garage. And as kids, we'd walk through the garage and there'd be, 10 or 12 different game birds, hanging up on a piece of string. And occasionally he would, as you're walking through the garage with him, he might just tap on the birds. And I always used to wonder why he did that. And then I asked the question one day as the years, we got older and stuff. And he was waiting for that first maggot to drop from the bird, right? And that was to him was to say that they were ready for plucking and gutting, because, back in the day you used to hang the birds to develop all that flavour. And obviously in the UK it was cold. So, So then what would happen is we'd have the challenge as kids of plucking and gutting the birds and stuff. And it's quite funny because my sister, unfortunately my father passed away about 30 years ago, but my sister sent this video of us sitting on milk crates in the kitchen plucking and gutting pheasants and partridges as kids. So it was food was always, it played a part, and we always used to sit down at least once a week round the table as kids, and we had seven of us sat around this big round table in the lounge room. We would always have Sunday dinner together, and the funny thing was, and everyone still reminds me of this to this day, is I used to wait until everyone had finished their meals at the dinner table, and I would go around everyone's plates and clean up what they'd left. I don't know why. It was, and that was my thing. So I suppose from a very early age, food was it was a big part of what we did. And my father used to cook some amazing meals, and I can always remember whenever the rabbit was being cooked that he'd tell all the rest of the siblings that it was chicken, and I would stand over the stove with him, and he'd just throw this and that in the pot and cook it away, and we'd be tasting it. I suppose that's probably where my interest came from it, you know what I mean? But he used to, one of my great memories is soft cod's roe. And back in the UK, the cod's roe that you get was, if you used to poach it in milk and garlic and, some thyme and rosemary, let it cool down a little bit and then dust it through seasoned flour and pan fry it. And my mum always, she'd always bake bread because, we couldn't really afford to buy bread. But she would always bake the bread. And he'd toast some of the homemade chunky bread that he'd slice and pan fry this cod's roe, and put salt and pepper on it and just spread that all over. You spread it all over the toast. It was a great food memory, and things like that with, pickled walnuts. So we used to pickle walnuts, and you might slice a couple of them and put them on the cod's roe as well for a bit of acidity to cut through it. And, it's all this old sort of, cheap food, in them times, which has now become a bit of a delicacy, I suppose.
Tell us about the beginnings of your career. Do you have any stories of what it was like sort of in the first couple of years in a commercial kitchen?
It was hard. It was very hard. I mean, I went to college for a couple of years and trained and got that under my belt. And, I was a bit of a ratbag as a kid, to be honest with you, Anthony. I didn't go to school much. I walked away with no real grades per se. And my kids are going to probably listen to this at some point now, and I've never ever told them that. Because you want to be that sort of great father figure. But I was a shocker as a kid. I was out, fighting for anything I could get hold of. And I used to scramble on motorbikes and need to steal motorbikes to be able to get parts for motorbikes. So anyway, I didn't go to school much, but, I suppose, I got a bit of a leg up and decided I needed to do something. And there was a connection with a friend that had gone to college, and I went, you know what, I love the whole food thing. And, mate, you didn't need any qualifications to go to catering college. I thought, this is perfect. I love food, go to catering college. So I remember going off to catering college initially, and in the first 3 months of being there, I had this Welsh teacher, and I won't tell you exactly what he said to me, but I'll a bit of an outline. But he pulled me to one side and he basically said, sort yourself out or get out. Because, there was 4 classes, of about 30 to 35 students, and mate, I was coming bottom of all the classes in everything that I did from the written side of stuff. But in the classes itself, I was, it was great. I enjoyed myself, and, I was cooking good food, and, but I just couldn't get that written side sorted out. But him saying that gave me a bit of a kick up the arse, and I went, you know what, I've got this far. I'm enjoying it. I need to apply myself to that side of things to make it work. So I sort of went over the next 6 months from becoming bottom of the class to, third in. I think I ended up finishing my course third in the whole of the 4 classes, which was, I was pretty proud of myself, to say the least, for someone that's, sort of left school with nothing. And that, I suppose, gave me a bit more of the drive, I suppose, to keep going. I enjoyed it. There was, food was becoming a massive part of my life. It was around the time when people like Marco Pierre White was exploding, and, and I thought to myself, I need to get to London. So I managed to get through my TAFE teacher, through my college teacher, a guy called Alan Deegan, get a stage at the Ritz Casino down in Green Park, and a stage at Claridge's hotel. So I sort of did both, and I was seeing a girl at the time back in my hometown, and she didn't want me to leave, and this, and I was like, what do I do? But I'd really enjoyed the Ritz Casino. I think Claridge's, for me at that particular time, I just felt like you were a bit more of a number, whereas the casino was a bit more of a tight family. I ended up taking a job at the Ritz Casino, and it was just mind-blowing. You know, I sort of met, and I've still got at home a signed autograph from, you know, Joan Collins, who sort of undressed me with her eyes when, you know, I asked the waiter to go out and see if she'd, you know, give me her autograph, and she said, "I'm not signing it unless it comes out." So I went out to the table, and, you know, Joan Collins was sort of in her heyday there, and, you know, you just felt like you were being stripped naked. It was I was, you know, a little bit nerve-wracking to say the least, you know what I mean? So got her autograph, and, you know, I worked with some very, very inspirational chefs. The late John King, who was my head chef, and, you know, he was a phenomenal guy and chef, and that sort of introduced me to the whole world of, you know, competition work, and, you know, so I, you know, went to, you know, the southwest of England and won gold medals, and Hotel Olympia, and won silver medals and bronze medals, and it was just, you know, an eye-opener to working with great people and phenomenal produce. And then I went down to Les Ambassadors on Hyde Park Corner, which John King moved over to. That was another casino, and still to this day is a, you know, one of London's top casinos, and worked there for a period of time, and then got introduced to a guy called Michael Kitts, who was working at the Souffle next door, and that was one star at the time, and he was opening up a hotel in the southwest of England in Bristol, and went down with a team of 13 of us, and I literally worked for like 7 months with no day off, and my feet were bleeding. Got promoted through the ranks quite quickly, just through just sheer tenacity and just working my heart out, I suppose. But then it got to a point where I was, because I'd grafted for so many years and I'd never really taken any time off, and I just went, you know, I need a bit of a break. And then I moved back to my hometown of Rugby and sort of worked into a couple of places there. And I suppose it was always with my intentions of travelling, and that's where it sort of all started to you know, think about starting to leave the UK. So I got some money together and put that to one side, and you know, me and my brother, we started getting up to our old tricks and becoming rat bags again. It was just like, mate, if I don't leave, I'm either going to go to jail, you know, or I've got to take the opportunity and get out of there. And one Sunday night, there was a whole load of us around the house, and I turned around and said, "Look, I'm going. I'm getting out of here. I've had enough." So, "Oh yeah, where are you going?" "Mate, let's just go off to the Greek islands." You know, mate, it was a bit of a craze thing then, and I goes, "I'm booking my flight tomorrow morning." And my brother came to me with his flight money, and literally from the Sunday, by the Wednesday, we were on a plane off to the Greek islands, and we've never turned back, and went out to the Greek islands, lived in the Greek islands for a couple of years, you know, sort of on and off, going back, and travelled all around the Middle East, and, you know, just had a lot of fun. But, you know, look, the Greek islands were great because, you know, not only did you have the weather and you could have a lot of fun and party, but, you know, I was working in a restaurant right on the beach, you know, cooking Mediterranean-style food. And it sort of, I suppose, opens, you know, I was predominantly trained in sort of French, English cuisine. So going off to the Greek islands, it sort of just changed everything and made me realise that food didn't have to be that heavy sort of, you know, French, English cuisine, and it could be lighter and a bit more, you know, and still keeping simple. But yeah, it just changed my outlook on food, I suppose. Yeah, and then, you know, sort of met people on the way, and you know, ended up in Johannesburg in Africa. which was a bit of an eye-opener. I sort of pulled up at a friend's house and, in Joburg thinking, Jesus, look at this place. This is a mansion. It's got, big fences and barbed wire. And I'm thinking, God, these guys must be loaded. But not that they were loaded. It was just pure security because of how volatile the place was. And it was like, after being there for a few weeks, you go, okay, this is probably not the place I really want to stay. And Joburg was, I think at that particular point in time was like was the third most volatile country in the world. So I decided to get out of that. There was a few of us that went there and people were buying combi vans and this, that and the other. And I was travelling with an Irish mate of mine and he said, he goes, come and have a look at this. And I walked around the corner of this car yard and there was this 1971 Chevy Impala and we ended up buying it. And, we travelled around, South Africa, all the garden route and ended up in Cape Town and lived in Cape Town for about 4 months and which was an amazing experience. And look, whilst I was in Cape Town, I really wanted to work in the food scene. I did a couple of trials on the waterfront, and I know it's changed now because you've got people like Liam Tomlinson's that's down in Cape Town, and I see what he's doing, and I'm sure it was probably there. And I don't know if it was me not looking hard enough, but I did a couple of trials, and I sort of got probably a little bit of a bad taste in my mouth because I'd go and work in these seafood restaurants and everything was frozen. And I couldn't understand why there was all these fishing trawlers, but yet everything was frozen coming out into the restaurants and, and you deep fry. I didn't get it, you know what I mean? So that sort of and I just went, you know what, let's just have some more fun. And I had a bit of money in my bank at the time as well. So I probably ate more food and messed around a little bit more than probably I looked to work. But, I enjoyed myself. So then we travelled back up to Joburg. I dropped the car off and then I literally hitched, went up to Pretoria, caught the train through Swaziland into Maputo, Mozambique, and everyone was like, you're mad. They're out of civil war 3 years. You're mad. What are you doing? So there was a few of us, there was like 4 of us that decided to hitch through Mozambique. That was one of the most life-changing moments or times of my life. And, it's funny because it's literally just a few weeks ago I started talking to my kids because I actually want to take them back to Africa and 4x4 across the Serengeti. So we travelled up through Mozambique. I caught hitch lifts with the Italian ambassador on safari. Hitched a lift with this Dutch guy and ended up in a place called Inhambane, and we just sat having a glass of wine and a bit of a chat, and we sort of asked him who, idle chit chat, who lives next door, and he goes, a couple of commercial fishermen. They don't really ever see them. And literally about half an hour later, these 2 young South African guys popped up and got chatting to them, and they said, why don't you come and stay on the beach with us? And we were like, yeah, why not? So they drove us in their 4x4s, and it was literally off-road. You couldn't get there by car. And we got there, and it was like a scene out of MASH, with the big green tents. They had no running water. They had to pump it from a well. There's lots of coconut trees, and we literally lived on the beach for about 8 weeks. But the exposure to, I'd go out and that's where I really sort of enjoyed from a cooking side of things being in Africa, because I'd go down the beach and there'd be the locals with their fishing nets pulling the fish in, and I'd go in and start helping them pull the nets in. And they're all a little bit, what's this white man doing? And I'd help them pull it in. They'd all, because they couldn't speak the language, and I'd just walk off once I'd seen what they'd pulled in, and over a course of 8 weeks, I'm doing this a couple of times a week, and they started giving me fish. So I'd start cooking in it's like a witch's cauldron called a poiki. I'd start cooking up some, just some simple braises and roasting fish, and it was 8 weeks of some of the most memorable times. You'd have prawns and all this different types of fish, and we'd go out and do a bit of spearfishing because these guys did a lot of it. So they, you go out and no tanks, just with the metre-long fins, and, you get lobsters. And I think I've got some pictures somewhere with about 10 lobsters' tails hanging out of this poiki. So that was, that again was exposing me just to some amazing fresh produce. And, so then from that, I sort of hitched my way all the way up through Namibia. I went into the top of Namibia, went up through Zimbabwe, from Malawi, did the Victoria Falls, caught malaria. That knocked me about a bit. Went into Zambia, and then I lived in Lake Malawi for about 4 months. Which was another amazing experience, but never got into Tanzania, which I really wanted to do, and go and do the Serengeti. And then from there, I ended up in Australia, hence where the silly goatee beard and the long hair came from.
After the extraordinary experiences that you had in Africa and South Africa, what did you think of the food culture of Sydney when you landed here?
Look, it was totally different. I mean, at that particular time, there was a lot of this fusion stuff going on, which also had the nickname Confusion, because, everyone thought that they could, throw a bit of Asian into Mediterranean-style food, and it does. Whilst some of it worked, there was a lot of it that was, hence the name, Confusion. So there was, but at the same time, there was a lot of great restaurants. At that time, you got Number 7 at the Park Hyatt was around. You had Marinese was going strong, and so there was a lot of these places which, I was learning about, and getting a bit of inspiration, and but I thought it was definitely different to what I was used to. But I think there was it was quite experimental at the same time. Tetsuya was coming up, and becoming a big name in them times, and you'd see how light and fresh his food was, which was again sort of very, very inspirational. And it was who else was there? There was Deep Ma Soya, and all the guys. It was and Liam. And then Liam was sort of coming up through the ranks and becoming a big player. And then I was sort of working at the Opera House for a couple of years, and I'd basically worked in functions. I'd worked in the concourse, which is now Opera Bar, and that was a funny old place. Because everything was out of bain maries. There was no real cooking. That was a bit of an eye opener, to say the least. And then I went. I was leaving to go back I hadn't been home for quite a few years because of the travelling, and I needed to get back and see my family. And then Michael Moore and Trevelyan Bale were sort of taking over Bennelong, because Yanni had sort of departed from the Opera House, and they were coming to take over Bennelong. And I sort of, this could be a great opportunity. So anyway, I went off back to the UK, and I came back, and I can remember saying to Dave, Dave, I'd really love to, because they needed a sous chef at the Bennelong restaurant. I said, I really want to have a crack at going for this job. And he said, well, I said, who do I see? And he said, go and speak to Trevelyan. So I went to Trevelyan Bale and I said, mate, I want to apply for this job. And he basically looked at me and he said, look, I don't think you're up to it. And I was like, F you. I goes, mate. And I was a bit annoyed, and I was like, mate, just give me 1 week. Look me in the eye at the end of the week and tell me I'm no good. I guess you don't have to pay me. I said, mate, just give me 1 week to prove myself. And the rest was sort of history. They ended up paying me for the week. And, I ended up having, the privilege of working with a guy called Andy Turner. And we were like being sort of co-head chefs and stuff. And he was one of Marco's original guys. I learned a shitload off him. He was such a great guy, very talented chef. And we worked at Bennelong for, I think it was about a year, and then it sort of went a little bit tits up, and Michael departed, Trevelyan departed. And then one Sunday night, we're working. Me and Andy used to, swap. We'd either cook or we'd do the pass or, jump on a section wherever. And I was on the pass on the Sunday night, and the phone rang at about 8 o'clock. And I picked up the phone. I goes, yep, Boronia Kitchen, Simon. Yep, hi, mate. My name's Matt Moran, and I was just wondering if you've got time for a bit of a chat. I goes, mate, I'm in the middle of service. Like, can you call me back tomorrow? And I put the phone down. And Andy's looking at me, and Andy's about 6'4", right? So he's bent down, back under the pass, looking through at me, and he goes, who was that? And I go, some guy called Matt Moran. And he goes, and I looked at him, I goes, I should have taken that phone call, shouldn't I? And he goes, yeah, probably. And what I didn't know in the background was Matt was selling Bon Femme to Andy Turner and Michael Moore, and at the same time was headhunting me to go to Aria. So I was like, God, have I made a mistake here? So anyway, I ended up talking to Matty the next day, and we hooked up a meeting, and, we sort of hit it off, 2 peas in the pod pretty much straight away. And he turned around to me and he said, mate, do you want to come and do this function? It's actually in the toaster in the penthouse suite. I was like, yep. And of course, I was coming to leave Bennelong, and, in them days, when you leave a business, you got absolutely, if they liked you, you got slaughtered, in a sense of they'd try and stitch you up in, whatever they can. And I can remember one of the kids in the Bennelong restaurant coming to me with a bucket full of fish's guts and crap, and I could see it coming. So I put my hand out to stop it, but it was one of them metal buckets with the handles on it. And as it came up, it hooked into my hand and literally ripped my hand open. So I've got this cracking scar on my hand to this day, and they're all covering me and stuff. And I went, guys, I get it, fun and jokes, but look at this. And I literally had to, and there was a lot of adrenaline going, I literally had to open my hand up and show them how badly ripped my hand was, for them all to go, oh shit, I think we should stop. So I ended up having all these stitches, and, the first time I got to work with Matt in this event was, with my hand stitched up. So I couldn't really do anything because my hand was wrapped up, and, but we ended up doing this great event in the penthouse, and, and then the rest was history, really. I started working at Aria and, watching I remember going around there initially at the start, and it was just all breeze blocks and just a shell, basically. And then obviously seeing where it's gone over the years is just phenomenal.
In part 2 of our chat with Simon Sandall, he tells us about building the Aria brand with Matt Moran, the creation of Boronia Kitchen, and the day that changed his life forevermore. This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. Stay tuned as we take a deep dive into the lives of the incredible people who ply their trade in the food and hospitality sector. Special thanks to executive producer Rob Locke for making this all happen. Follow us on Instagram at Deep in the Weeds Podcast, or email us at podcast@deepintheweeds.com.au. Stay safe and be well.